Most of you know this, but I'm a big fan of baseball, and one of the things that's so interesting about being a fan of baseball is that there are rules to playing the game, and then you will often hear about this thing called unwritten rules of playing the game. There are all kinds of ways that one's supposed to behave when they are playing in the game of baseball that have nothing that appears in a rule book that somebody's supposed to follow. Well, our lectionary seems to have all of the written holidays of the year, and in fact, we're preparing for some big ones. We have Thanksgiving right around the corner, and then right after that, we have Christmas, and we have New Year's. These are all things that the prayer book has special services for, and we have the baptism of Jesus after that. And this year, Ash Wednesday almost overlaps with Epiphany. Easter comes so early in the year, and so we have these official markers on the day. But just the way there's official holidays in the church year, there are several unwritten or unofficial holidays too. And today is one of those unofficial days. So if you look in the lectionary, every year about the 1st of November or the second Sunday of November, kind of depending when All Saints falls, you get this same story about this woman who puts her coin in. And there's a real method to this madness. It is that the editors of the lectionary knew that in most parishes, this Sunday was known as Pledge Sunday. And they put this reading about this widow giving everything she had in the lectionary so that the preacher could get up there and Pledge Sunday and put it to the congregation to give. And there are a bunch of these actually in there. You'll also notice, maybe you haven't noticed because you don't write an annual meeting address every year, but we always get Fishers of Men on the Sunday that is most likely to be the annual meeting Sunday in most parishes too. In fact, I've thought about moving our annual meeting so I'd have some other bloody gospel passage to have on that day, but it's always there because that's what the lectionary writers thought would be an appropriate reading on a Sunday when the congregation would get together to be infused about its mission. And today, they want you to feel bad about your pledges. And they accomplished that. There's lots of obvious things going on in this passage, and we're going to get them out of the way right away. But there's actually a dark side of this passage, too, that I haven't come to a full resolution in my own self with. And I'll put it out there, and maybe I shouldn't put out things I don't have an answer for, but maybe somebody of a bigger mind will. And so there's the obvious things going on in this passage. There are two pictures of people. There's a picture of the person who is using their influence and power to gain respect and authority in the community. And in fact, they are the person that is seen as the authority in the community. In fact, I think our translators do us a disservice today by calling these people scribes. They really are just the experts in everything. They have this name scribe, but that means nothing to us. You need to imagine the person who knows all of the ins and outs. They could be a lawyer. They could be a doctor. They could be somebody who's a professor or a teacher. They could be somebody who's a politician. These are people who have authority in some way given to them by society. And Jesus makes it very clear that they have used that authority in an abusive way. The first picture is one where they have devoured widows' houses to get where they are at. They are actually the picture of the bad steward. You might not have thought about it that way because often when we think of stewardship, we just think of the handing over piece. But actually, stewardship has as much to do with what you do once you have the stuff as it has to do with you giving up your stuff. And these folks have been bad stewards. In fact, Jesus says they have incurred a greater condemnation because their stewardship was so poor. Not because they didn't give, but because they didn't use correctly. And then on the other side, we have this obvious other message, which is, you will never give enough. The message of the widow's mite, actually just like this passage we hear from 1 Kings this morning as well, is meant to be there to let us know that in general, we are terrible givers. And I put myself in that same category, and I'm really uncomfortable with what the biblical image of giving is. The biblical image of giving is exactly in that story of the widow in Zarephath, where Elijah shows up and he says, make me bread with the last little grains you have. And if you make it for me, you'll always have enough. Now, I got to tell you, that's a really hard message. And I'm guessing nobody in this room, in fact, I know nobody in this room, has ever given to the point that they felt like they would not have enough to live to test God on this matter. The God consistently says in the stories that are found in the Bible that if you give more than you can, I will make up the difference. And so that widow that interacts with Elijah, and then the widow that we see in the story here, does just that. Jesus makes a point of telling us she didn't just put in a small offering, she put in everything she had to live on. And by that measure, none of us even come close. And if we want something to beat us up, we can just let the passage do that this morning, because I don't need to beat us up about that. But those obvious messages get buried. I mean, those obvious messages have this other undercurrent that it brings them together in a way I'm not so comfortable with. And that is that this passage this morning, by having these two things side by side, is not just to compare them. It's not just to show us the giving or the income side of stewardship and what we're meant to give, which is everything. And the using side of stewardship means that we should use these in ways that don't curry our own favor. But the dark side of this, and the gospel writer here, and Jesus makes very clear that they are not just two pictures of stewardship. They are a single picture of a dysfunctional stewardship society. Because it's not just that those people who are abusing the offerings of others are doing it, and that's one sin, and the people that are giving a lot or not giving a lot is another sin. Is that there is some structure in place that enables all of this to happen, because there is a direct cause and effect between that widow's gift and their respect and authority in the community. It's not just that we're supposed to look at one and pick which one we want to be. We are to realize that there's been some structure put in place that makes it so when widows give everything they have, other people can live high on the hog. In fact, it is mentioned in both places by Jesus himself that the way these experts in the law, or these scribes, got to where they are is by devouring widows' houses. It isn't by some other way. And then the symbol of somebody who's giving good is that widow putting it in the treasury. Now, you might think that this story is just about a religious organization, but let me just tell you that it's not what's going on here at all. We sometimes get a little confused as to what the full message is here, because in the lectionary even leaves this out. There is a prepositional phrase before the beginning of this passage this morning that says Jesus was in the temple teaching when he saw all of this. And he actually doesn't move in the whole time, though you might think he's moving too. But the temple is not the symbol of religion that we take it to be. The temple is the symbol of the way they have ordered their society. And the reason the temple is there is because the Romans learned a very important occupying tactic from the Greeks. And that was a tactic that the Greeks had learned from the Persians, which was, if you want to maintain peace in your empire, you need to find a way to allow people to still maintain their cultural identity. Because if you come in and try to put yours on them, you will have nothing but skirmishes and battles all of the time. And the way that the Romans do this, which the Greeks were not so smart about, and actually that's why the Greeks fall in this area, they do that around the temple. They tell the people that are living in Palestine in that time that call themselves Jews, you can do anything you want in this temple, and you can structure your society in any way you desire. and we're going to give you this space of the temple to keep your culture alive. And Jesus is saying, in this very cultural relevant way to them, his disciples who are sitting there watching all of this take place in this symbol of Jewish society and culture and ordering, that this is wrong. The societies that are ordered so that people who are seen as being important are there because the people who are seen as not being important give all that they have, incur a condemnation on themselves. This passage isn't just about stewardship being a giving and taking thing. Stewardship is actually a structure that we put in place that we can order our society in such a way that when widows give all that they have, they retain their dignity, that their giving doesn't become sacrificing. It just stays as giving. Because sacrificing implies that somebody else derives a benefit from what they put in that treasury box that day. Their giving is just giving because they trust the Lord to care for them. It's not sacrificing. That stewardship doesn't just have to do with the envelope that one puts in the plate and the check that is written by the treasurer of a place, or the tax that is paid in a community and the way it's dispersed throughout the community. It's not just when it's taken in and given out. It's in the structure that's been put in place to make that society just and dignified at all levels. Because Jesus isn't making a comment this morning about what we do with our offerings in this church only. Jesus is making a comment about how we put our neighborhoods and cities and states and nations in order so that when people give, it remains giving and not sacrificing so that somebody else can be respected. It reminds me we have this language of makers and takers in our society that we often hear, where Jesus actually says that the takers in a society ordered the way that these Jewish people have ordered theirs, the ones who we would call makers, the ones who are important, the ones who seem to get ahead by their good works and the way that they conduct their business in the world, are actually the ones that are taking as they devour widows' houses, and a greater condemnation is seen for them. Now, this isn't a message that I'm not supporting any political theory or any way that we should have legislation, but I am saying that if we want to be good stewards in the world, we have to think not just about the amount on our check that we write, because Jesus has already said the amount is worthless. In fact, the amount that widow puts in the offering that day is not going to pay anybody's light bill, period. And one of those rich people that's giving out their abundance, they might pay the utilities for that place for an entire year, and yet it is still a worse offering based on what it can perform. Stewardship isn't about the amount. And stewardship isn't necessarily about whether we look like we are just when we dole it out. But stewardship is about what we build together that makes sure there is security for everybody who gives, no matter what the amount. That there is a way that it is equitable. And mostly, that it retains human dignity for all people at all levels of gifts, and that they are seen as important. What does that mean for us in a parish? What does that mean for us in our county or state? Well, I'd say if we want to start this conversation about stewardship, it's not just about getting a good pledge going. It's not just about getting a good amount of money out in the system that we feel is charitable and makes the world look at us in a way that makes us look respected and honored. But it's about figuring out, how does that money get from the offering plate to the people who deserve it and need it? What is that society we build where giving remains giving and sacrificing, which we still need to do from time to time, remains that as well? But that's in the heart of the person giving or sacrificing, and not in the person taking and using. Amen.